It was the 4th year of my marriage to Alma Morris. The school bully who once tormented her got married. I returned home with an anniversary gift. I found her attempting suicide by slitting her wrists in the bathroom. I frantically rushed her to the hospital, only to hear her final whisper, "Darwin Lloyd, I miss you so much." Living life again, I watched as Darwin Lloyd dragged Alma Morris into the small woods. This time, I didn't intervene. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. On the day I went to attend Alma Morris's funeral, I got into a car accident. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in high school. I stared in shock at my mother, who was over a decade younger, her hair still thick and black. "What are you daydreaming about? Go tutor Alma." My mother's voice snapped me back to reality. Tutor? I remembered. In my previous life, Alma Morris was in the regular class while I was in the advanced class. Alma was terrible at math. On a 150-point test, scoring even a third of that was considered an exceptional performance. As the final year of high school approached, Alma's parents were desperate and thought of me. Our families were neighbors, and our parents worked at the same factory, always maintaining a good relationship. My mother thought tutoring Alma would be a good review for me as well, so she agreed. I looked down at the study materials in my hand, a thick stack. To help Alma improve her grades, I spent almost all my free time preparing lessons for her during this crucial period of our senior year. But what was the result? Whenever I tutored Alma, she was always distracted. No matter how detailed my explanations were, she still didn't grasp the concepts. The twice-weekly tutoring sessions continued without fail, but when it came to exams, Alma's math scores still dragged down her overall grade. In the end, she only got into a local ordinary university. As for me, perhaps because I was distracted, I didn't perform well in the exams either. Not wanting to be too far from her, I gave up the opportunity to attend a top university in B City. I stayed and enrolled in an ordinary university in our city. Looking at the materials in my hand, I smiled self-mockingly. "Mom," I said to my mother, "I feel like studying has been a bit challenging lately. I don't think I'll have the energy to tutor Alma anymore." My mother, busy with her work, didn't pay much attention. "That's fine, your own studies should come first. I'll call Mrs. Lawson later and let her know." I responded with an "oh." I took the study materials back to my room. I wasn't exactly lying. After all, in my memory, high school life was something from over a decade ago. To catch up, I barely slept the entire weekend. Fortunately, the first round of review had just begun at school, and my foundation wasn't bad. As long as I put in more effort, I would surely catch up quickly. On Monday at school, I arrived with heavy dark circles and bloodshot eyes. My desk mate, seeing my haggard appearance, asked, "Why do you look like a ghost? Did you stay up all night playing League of Legends?" Indeed, having just started the school year, everyone still lacked a sense of urgency about exams. On the first day of school, I tried my best to blend in. My close friends just thought I hadn't slept well and didn't suspect anything. Before the evening self-study session, a few female classmates stood by the back window of the classroom, gossiping excitedly. I just sneaked a peek at him through their classroom's back door. "He's so handsome." Who? Who are you talking about?" "The new transfer student in Class B4, Darwin Lloyd." Hearing Darwin Lloyd's name, I coldly curled my lip. In my previous life, Darwin Lloyd had become a sensation in the school as soon as he transferred. It was said that he came from an influential family background. Despite being expelled from multiple schools for misconduct, he always managed to transfer to a new school unscathed. Class B4 was the worst-performing regular class, filled with all sorts of characters. Skipping classes and not doing homework was the norm, and fighting and causing trouble wasn't uncommon. Most of the students in Class B4 came from families with connections or wealth and power, so the school teachers turned a blind eye. As long as they didn't disturb other classes or cause any fatalities, they let these troublemakers be. As for Alma Morris, I didn't know how she got involved with Darwin Lloyd. By the time I first noticed her unusual behavior, she had already been bullied for some time. Soon, various rumors about her and Darwin Lloyd spread throughout the school. Alma Morris, covered in injuries, developed depression. Her parents were so angry they took her to the police station to file a report. But Alma refused to cooperate with the police and tell the truth. In the end, due to insufficient evidence, the case was not filed. Thinking back to when I was with Alma, she would wake up terrified from nightmares countless times. At that time, I was filled with regret, wishing I had rescued Alma from Darwin Lloyd's clutches earlier. But I never expected that when I truly returned to campus. I no longer wanted to interfere with the grudges between Alma Morris and Darwin Lloyd. This time, I would respect her fate. I wanted to rewrite my own brilliant life. Back on campus, my attitude towards Alma Morris changed significantly. Perhaps due to the butterfly effect, Darwin Lloyd's entanglement with Alma began earlier than I remembered. In the evening after school, I retrieved my bicycle from the bike shed. "Simon Joan." It was Alma Morris's voice. I steadied the bike with one foot and turned around. Alma had a loose ponytail, revealing her fair and delicate face. Slightly panting, she ran towards me. "Why haven't you been waiting for me after school lately?" My voice was a bit cold. "Our class has too much homework. I'm in a hurry to get back." Alma Morris didn't think much of it and just said, "Oh." Looking at me, her eyes wandered as she tugged at her backpack strap. I can't find my car keys. Can you give me a ride?" Looking at the face that had accompanied me for 15 years, I remembered Alma's last words on her deathbed. I actually hated her, but I couldn't help feeling mixed emotions. I turned around and stepped on the bicycle pedal. "Get on." Alma grabbed my school uniform jacket and sat on the back seat. On the way, we were both silent. I was because of the grudge from my past life. But Alma didn't know why. It was the first time she was so quiet in front of me. As we were about to reach the neighborhood, Alma suddenly asked from behind, "If a very pretty girl confessed to you now, what would you do?" My fingers gripping the handlebars gradually tightened, my knuckles turning white. I said coldly, "I don't know." Hearing my answer, Alma didn't say anything and fell silent again. When we got to the building, I locked the bike in the corridor. Alma's family lived on the first floor, mine on the third. Just as I was about to go upstairs, Alma grabbed my clothes again. Afraid of being overheard by the families, she lowered her voice. "What if you rejected that girl, but she still kept pestering you?" In the darkness, I looked at Alma's bright eyes. Seeing that I didn't say anything, and that I had been particularly distant towards her lately, she was a bit dissatisfied, puffed up her cheeks at me, and tugged at my sleeve. "Hey, Simon Joan, what's wrong with you today? Did the teacher scold you? Or did you fight with a classmate?" I pulled back my jacket sleeve, sighed inwardly, and decided to warn her one last time. "Alma, don't mess with people you shouldn't. Don't think about things you shouldn't. If you can't solve something yourself, go to the teachers, parents, or the police." I thought Alma would take my words to heart to some extent. But unexpectedly, she questioned me with eyes full of wariness. "Simon, did you hear something from someone?" Before I could answer, Alma's mood changed quickly, and she childishly threatened me. "No matter what you heard, don't tell my parents. Otherwise, I'll never talk to you again." I was speechless. Respect. Best wishes. The next day, I arrived at school early. There were only a few bikes in the school's bike shed. As I pushed my bike in, I immediately saw a bicycle lying on the lawn. It looked like it was scrapped. The seat was gone, the frame was bent, and the wheels were as flat as if they hadn't been pumped for 10 years. After parking my bike, I casually picked it up. Looking down at it again and again, I suddenly felt that this silver-pink folding bike looked somewhat familiar. When I noticed the white hair tie bound to the handlebars, I realized that this was Alma's bike. I gave a cold laugh. I see it's not that she lost her car keys, but that someone confiscated her bike. Remembering Alma's threat last night, I gritted my teeth. Now I only pity this bike for following the wrong owner. After the last class in the afternoon ended, I was about to go to the cafeteria with my classmates. But someone came to find me. I looked towards the back door. It was Alma's best friend, Carly Griffiths. I signaled to my classmates to go ahead and went to the back door to ask her what was the matter. Carly Griffiths looked at me, her expression somewhat hesitant. She glanced around, stood on tiptoe to get closer to me, and said in a lowered voice, "I want to talk to you about Alma." My expression remained indifferent. "I'm very busy." Carly Griffiths frowned. "Aren't you close with her? How can you not care about her affairs?" I found it amusing. "Why should I care? Don't you know that time is precious now? We can't waste even a second." But Carly Griffiths became a bit anxious. "Haven't you always had a secret crush on Alma?" My expression turned cold. "Who said I have a secret crush on her?" Carly Griffiths lowered her head and said softly, "Alma told me." I curled my lips in mockery and let out a light heh. So Alma had always known about my feelings for her. I still remember in my past life, Alma frequently changed boyfriends in university and always treated me as her male best friend, dragging me along to give her opinions. When we graduated from university, I finally couldn't hold back anymore and confessed to her under the influence of alcohol. At that time, Alma looked surprised and said she thought we had always been just friends. My cold attitude made Carly Griffiths feel a bit defeated. She bit her lip, but still took a deep breath and told me, "Darwin Lloyd is pursuing Alma." "So?" I sneered and said sarcastically, "Are you here to warn me not to ruin their happiness?" "No." Carly Griffiths stomped her foot in frustration. "Because Darwin Lloyd is not a good person. Alma didn't agree to go out with him, and last night he smashed her bicycle. I saw it with my own eyes. So why come to me? Go to the teachers." Carly Griffiths wrinkled her face in frustration. "Alma won't let me tell the teachers. She said if I dare to tell anyone, she'll end our friendship. So I came to find you. I want you to persuade her. I think Alma might like Darwin Lloyd a little, but she's also a bit afraid of him. Anyway, it's complicated. Carly Griffiths." I interrupted her, once again reviewing with her. "If you want to help her, go to the teacher. If you don't dare, then don't get involved. Getting involved won't lead to good results, because I've been through it before. In my previous life, when I discovered what Darwin Lloyd was doing to Alma Morris, it was at an age of recklessness and fearlessness. How could I tolerate it? So I rushed into Class B4, and in front of everyone, I punched Darwin Lloyd. But Darwin Lloyd had been fighting and causing trouble since he was young, and when it came to real fighting, I was no match for him. Moreover, this was his territory. Several of Darwin Lloyd's close classmates joined in to beat me up. I was beaten half to death. Due to bone fractures, I had to recuperate at home for over a month before returning to school. Even so, whenever I saw Darwin Lloyd making a move on Alma Morris, I would still fearlessly rush in. The homeroom teacher who originally valued me, after trying to guide me multiple times without success, gradually stopped paying attention to me. My grades also dropped from the top 10 in the grade to hovering in the middle of the class. But what about Alma Morris? She clearly had so many chances to escape from Darwin Lloyd. Yet she remained silent time and time again. Alma Morris was Darwin Lloyd's victim, but she was also her own perpetrator. After that, Carly Griffiths never came to find me again. Various rumors about Alma Morris and Darwin Lloyd also gradually spread throughout the school. When I was returning home from school one night, I ran into Alma Morris in the hallway. I realized then that we hadn't seen each other for over a month. As I pushed my bike in, Alma Morris was sitting on the stairs, with her sleeves rolled up, spraying something on her arm. Hearing the noise, she looked up nervously. Seeing me, she quickly stood up. Without saying a word, she stuffed something into her backpack, turned around, and ran back home with quick steps. On the ground, Alma Morris had dropped an empty box. I picked it up. It read, "Bruise and injury ointment." I casually tossed it into the garbage can in the corner. Back home, I sat on the sofa, trying on the latest basketball shoes. It was a gift my mom bought for me, to reward me for ranking second in the grade on the exam. As I was trying on the shoes, my mother brought over some cut fruit. "Mom wants to ask you something." "What is it?" I picked up a piece of apple with a toothpick. Is Alma dating someone at school? I paused. How would I know? We're not in the same class. Mother asked. Hasn't she mentioned anything to you? I shrugged nonchalantly. We're so busy with studies now, where's the time to chat? Sigh. Mother sighed. These past few days, your Aunt Lawson has been so worried at work. She says Alma's grades have dropped again, and she often comes home very late at night. When she does come home, she doesn't talk, just shuts herself in her room, saying she's studying. But looking at those grades, who knows what she's really doing? I quickly finished the fruit and stood up with my backpack. Anyway, I don't know the details. Hey! Mother stopped me. Did you and Alma have a fight? I've noticed you two don't seem to hang out much lately. I turned back helplessly. It's just that we're busy with studies. Mother stopped speculating and waved her hand. All right. When the weekend comes, after you finish your homework, you should invite Alma out to relax and have a chat. Mom has watched Alma grow up since she was little. Sigh. I'm just worried she might go astray. I looked at my mother, feeling a bit frustrated and unable to express it. Alma Morris had always been fair-skinned since she was young, and my mother always liked her. In my previous life, I was able to marry Alma Morris mainly because of the matchmaking efforts of both families' elders. But after marriage, Alma Morris became increasingly willful. My mother wanted to hold a grandchild, but Alma Morris was unwilling. If she didn't want to, that was fine. My mother couldn't bear to say anything to her, so she would only occasionally mention it to me. But Alma Morris was obsessed with so-called inspirational articles online and became increasingly intolerant of her mother-in-law. Alma Morris didn't work and never did housework at home. We hired a housekeeper and my mother often came over to help out. When my mother kindly washed Alma Morris's clothes, Alma Morris complained that she put them in the closet without ironing. When my mother kindly cooked meals, Alma Morris would complain either that there was too much salt or that it wasn't healthy. Caught between their various conflicts, I wanted to mediate but found myself powerless. It wasn't until this life that I understood. There was no such thing as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict. She simply hadn't married the person she wanted to marry and was just looking for trouble. I looked at my mother and smiled mischievously. You just need to worry about your son. Your son, me, will get first place in the grade next time for you to see. Time seemed to speed up, passing by quickly. Autumn went and winter came, and I was immersed in a sea of exam papers every day. In the blink of an eye, it was exam time. The teachers worked overtime to grade papers, and in just 2 short days, the grade rankings for the entire year were posted at the stairway entrance. I stood in front of the ranking list, looking at my name at the very top. I couldn't help but break into a big smile. This was perhaps the most satisfying moment since I had been reborn. Suddenly remembering something, I squeezed out of the crowd and went to Alma Morris's score sheet. Following the rankings, I found Alma Morris's name, and her overall ranking was 299 to 312. I was stunned for a moment. Although I had expected it, I was still shocked by how much her grades had dropped. Alma Morris used to be an average student, but at least she was in the middle of her grade. Now, she's almost fallen to the bottom 10 of the grade. TSK. My feelings are complicated in a way I can't describe. I casually glanced at the other names and suddenly saw Carly Griffiths. 112/312. I frowned, remembering that Alma had mentioned her best friend was a top student. How come her grades have dropped too? As I stepped away from the crowd, I caught a glimpse of Carly chasing after Alma's retreating figure. I think I can guess why now. In the evening, on the way to the cafeteria, my desk mate nudged me and jerked his chin towards the distance. Isn't that your childhood sweetheart? And is that Darwin Lloyd next to her? They really are an item, huh? I looked in the direction he indicated. Darwin was grabbing Alma's wrist, forcefully pulling her towards the small woods. I narrowed my eyes. I had seen this scene in my previous life too. Back then, I had rushed over in the heat of the moment and got into a big fight with Darwin. As a result, just as my fractured ribs had healed, I was forced to stay in bed for another week. But this time, something seemed different. In this life, Alma didn't seem to resist Darwin's physical advances as much. I coldly averted my gaze. Late that night, I had just fallen asleep. Suddenly, there was a hurried knocking at the door. I sat up in bed, hearing my parents rushing out of their bedroom to open the door. Through the door, I heard Uncle Morris and Aunt Lawson's voices. Uncle Morris spoke anxiously and incoherently. "Old Joan, can I borrow your car? My car's just been sent for annual inspection, and I can't get a taxi this late at night. I'm so worried, I had to come to you." My father was looking for his car keys while speaking. Don't worry. Tell me slowly what happened." Aunt Lawson sobbed and cried out. "Our Alma's been in a car accident. She's lying in the hospital now." Car accident? I was wide awake now. In my previous life, Alma had never been in a car accident. Remembering the scene from this afternoon, I clenched the bedsheets. Could it be that, because I didn't intervene in her affair with Darwin, it led to Alma getting into a car accident? I started to panic. Outside, my mother was startled when she heard Aunt Lawson's words. "What? How did she get into an accident? Look, let me and old Joan go with you. You're in no state to drive. You'll end up in the hospital too at this rate." I turned and got out of bed, about to ask if I could go and take a look too. When I opened my bedroom door, there was no one at the entrance anymore. I stood barefoot, leaning against the wall, and closed my eyes for a moment. My parents returned at dawn, just as it was time for me to get up. I asked my parents, "How's Alma?" "Oh, did we wake you up last night?" My mother changed into her slippers, her eyes a bit red. "Sigh, it's hard to say. The main issue is that she hit her head. The doctor said it's uncertain whether she'll wake up or not." "By the way," my mother asked, "is there a boy called Darwin Lloyd in your school?" As expected, I nodded. "Sigh, that child Alma. She skipped evening self-study to go racing with that boy. How could she just ride on a motorcycle like that, not even wearing a helmet?" I pressed my lips together, not making a sound. I turned around and silently went into the bathroom to wash up. Alma's sleep lasted for an entire year. By this time, I was already a first-year student at Cambridge University. My mother told me that the accident had left a permanent scar on Alma's face. Even with surgery, it couldn't be completely removed. Because of this scar, Alma developed depression. In her previous life, her depression was caused by Darwin. In this life, it was because her looks were ruined. I didn't know what to say. During the winter break, I returned home. Pulling my suitcase, I reached the ground floor and happened to run into Aunt Lawson helping Alma with her rehabilitation walk. Aunt Lawson saw me and smiled in surprise. "Winter break already?" I smiled and nodded. "Hello, Aunt Lawson." Shifting my gaze, I looked at Alma. She had become much thinner, her chin sharper, and on her pale cheek was a long scar. Seeing me, Alma's eyes suddenly welled up with tears. "Simon Joan, why didn't you save me?" I was stunned, not understanding what she meant. Alma stared at me with a complex gaze, approaching me with trembling lips. "That day, why didn't you stop me?" "Stop her?" Before I could react, Aunt Lawson quickly held Alma back. She smiled apologetically at me. "I'm sorry, Simon." Since Alma woke up, she often says strange things. It's nothing. You should go upstairs. Your mom must be anxiously waiting." I nodded, somewhat dazed, just as I picked up my suitcase and stepped onto the stairs. Suddenly, my spine stiffened. Could it be that Alma had also been reborn? In the evening, I sat in the living room watching TV with my mother. I brought up casually, "How is Alma's recovery going?" My mother bit into an apple. "I heard from your Aunt Lawson that her physical recovery is not bad. It's just..." Sigh. My mother tossed the apple core and sat up straight, ready to have a proper chat with me. That child Alma, as soon as she woke up, she kept asking to see that little hooligan Darwin Lloyd. She even said if she didn't go, he would get married and not want her anymore. It nearly drove her parents crazy. She just got out of the hospital a while ago, and then snuck out in the middle of the night to find that Darwin Lloyd. Your Aunt Lawson was so scared she almost called the police. Humph, and what about that Darwin Lloyd? He broke his leg, couldn't get proper treatment here, so his family sent him abroad for treatment. Ha! Serves him right. causing such harm to someone else's precious daughter. So Alma Morris did indeed wake up from the car accident and was reborn. But that has little to do with me now. She goes her sunny way. I have my own path to tread. From now on, we're strangers. The TV show ended, and Mother wanted to sleep early. Just as I was about to wash up and return to my room, Alma Morris came knocking. Seeing who it was, Mother gestured for me to have a good chat with her, then went back to her bedroom. I stood leaning against the door, arms crossed, looking down at her. "What do you want?" Alma Morris looked at me earnestly. "Can you take me to find Darwin Lloyd? My mom won't let me go out alone now. But if you say you're taking me out, she'll definitely let me go." I didn't expect her to be so direct from the start. Hearing this, I just wanted to laugh. "Do I look that free?" Alma Morris frowned. "Then can you lend me some money?" That tone sounding like a plea but actually a command. I'd heard it too many times after marrying her in my past life. She really did come back. Looking at the familiar Alma Morris before me, I frowned. "I'm still in school. Where would I get money from?" "Your family must give you an allowance. Don't you have any pocket money left?" I coldly curved one side of my lip. "Even if I did, why should I lend it to you? What makes you think you can pay me back?" Alma Morris's face grew increasingly displeased, gradually raising her voice. "Simon Joan, don't you always like me? You won't even help with this small favor." I couldn't help but laugh. "Heh, Alma Morris, you're too confident." Alma Morris was stunned, showing an expression of disbelief. After a while, she probed suspiciously. "Simon Joan, did you also?" I played dumb. "What are you talking about? Anything else? If not, I'm going to rest." Alma Morris still wouldn't give up. "Just help me." I slammed the door shut. Later, all news about Alma Morris came from my mother's phone calls. As soon as Alma Morris fully recovered, she was sent to a closed tutoring school to prepare for university applications again. The result wasn't as good as the school in her previous life. I heard that because of Darwin Lloyd, she had become complete enemies with her parents. The funny thing is, Darwin Lloyd, whom Alma Morris kept thinking about, never appeared again after that car accident. University time flew by in a flash. I didn't take the civil service exam and settle for an easy job like in my previous life. Instead, I chose to start a business with my classmates. Although the beginning was difficult, it fulfilled one of my dreams. After 2 years of constant struggles, the company finally got on track. I brought my retired parents to B-City and bought them a small villa with a yard in the suburbs. Let them grow vegetables, raise dogs, and pass the time. One day, Mother called me, saying Alma Morris had come to B-City and asked if I could pick her up at the station. Looking at the financial report in my hand, I said in a deep voice, "I'm busy. I'll have my assistant go." Mother said Alma Morris planned to find work in B-City. Thinking of old times, she asked if I could arrange a position for Alma Morris in my company. I pinched the corner of my eye and told Mother, "Her major doesn't match, she has no degree, and no work experience. If I arrange for her to come in, what would my subordinates think?" Mother understood and didn't insist. "But your Aunt Lawson is worried about Alma living alone, and my place is too far from the city. So could you rent an apartment for Alma near you, just to keep an eye on her? Mom will cover the rent for Aunt Lawson first." I smiled helplessly, not minding the small amount for rent. "Keep that money for yourself. Don't worry about the rent. I'll have my assistant arrange it." My assistant chose a small 2-bedroom apartment nearby. Although it was an old residential building, the landlord had renovated the interior and fully furnished it with appliances. I took a look and thought it was quite suitable. After all, rent prices in B-City are ridiculously expensive. Given Alma Morris's conditions, renting a whole 2-bedroom apartment was already luxurious. After Alma Morris moved in, Aunt Lawson transferred the rent to me. I accepted it without refusal. Even close brothers need to be clear about money, let alone Alma Morris, who has nothing to do with me. Mother kept urging me to find time to treat Alma Morris to a meal. After all, we grew up together, and I should show some hospitality as a local. But I was busy and didn't have the mood for it. Until one day, the receptionist called me, saying a Ms. Morris was looking for me. I showed no expression and said to let her in. A few minutes later, someone knocked on my office door. "Come in." Alma Morris pushed open the door. She was wearing a beige dress, her hair up in a bun, with light makeup. I narrowed my eyes slightly. This was completely different from her in the previous life. Alma Morris knew I liked a fresh and elegant style. But whenever she accompanied me to some formal occasions, she always dressed up flamboyantly and wore heavy makeup according to her own preferences. I coldly withdrew my gaze. "What brings you here?" "Nothing much." Alma Morris's voice was very soft, and for some reason, she seemed a bit timid. "I've been in B-City for a while now, and we haven't seen each other. I know you're too busy, so I came to your company to see you." I asked her indifferently, "How's your job search going?" Alma lowered her head. "As you know, I only have a high school education and no special talents." She didn't continue. For a moment, the spacious office fell into silence. Seeing that I didn't respond, Alma looked up. "Is your company hiring recently? Can I give it a try?" I curled my lip with a hint of mockery. "Our company hires people with at least a bachelor's degree, and they have to be exceptionally talented. Do you think you can replace anyone's position here?" Alma's face turned pale, and gradually her eyes reddened. Looking at her like this, I didn't feel much in my heart. I just thought that she had been given a chance to live again. Yet she was still living so pathetically. I thought after being ruthlessly rejected by me that day, Alma wouldn't come again. But afterward, she started showing up at my company even more frequently. One day, I returned to the company after signing a contract. I found her sitting in the break room. She was vividly recounting interesting stories from our childhood to my employees. A vein throbbed in my temple. "Alma." Alma's voice stopped abruptly, and she turned to look at me. I said coldly, "Come with me." Perhaps sensing my displeasure, the other employees quickly returned to their workstations. I closed the office door and asked Alma, "Do you plan to waste your life away like this forever?" Alma looked at me somewhat innocently. "I'm not." "Then why aren't you looking for a job properly instead of always hanging around here?" "I am trying hard." "What are you trying hard at?" Alma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She smiled slightly at me. "Trying hard to get you to arrange a position for me." She said it as if it were the most natural thing. I was at a loss for words. "That's impossible. If you keep this up, I'll call Mrs. Lawson and have her take you back home." At the mention of Mrs. Lawson, Alma's expression changed. She didn't say anything more and left the office directly. After that day, Alma never came to the company again. As for what she ended up doing, even my mother lost contact with her. Since I graduated, my mother has been anxious about me finding a partner. Thinking about my marriage with Alma in my previous life, I now have no interest in love whatsoever. Recently, my mother has frequently mentioned that her old classmate has a daughter who is pursuing a PhD in B-City. I know what she means, so I never respond. I always vaguely brush it off. Until my mother threatened to go back to our hometown, I had no choice but to agree to have a meal with her. The girl my mother introduced is called Yvette Johnston, a year younger than me. She's currently in her second year of a direct PhD program. In fact, she just graduated from college 2 years ago. I sat in the Western restaurant and saw a graceful figure following the waiter towards me. To be honest, Yvette's beauty was somewhat beyond my expectations. I stood up from my seat. "Miss Johnston." Yvette, who had rarely heard such a formal address, having just left the academic Eden, smiled at me awkwardly. "Just call me Yvette." I originally thought that Yvette, like me, was forced to attend this so-called blind date. But I didn't expect her to say, "I've actually seen you before." My hand paused as I was picking up food. "When?" "About 4 years ago, when the Internet Plus Innovation and Entrepreneurship competition was held at our school. I remember you led the team and did the project presentation. I was in the audience." Under the light, Yvette's cheeks were fair and rosy. "So when my mom mentioned you to me before, I've been wanting to meet you. I wanted to see if it was the same person." But you always seemed very busy. I took a sip of red wine, feeling a bit thirsty. It has been a bit busy lately. Just as she was about to say something more, my phone suddenly rang. Excuse me, I need to take this call. It was a call from an unknown number, asking if I knew someone named Alma Morris. I paused for a moment. Yes, I do. The police said. Then please come to the police station. Police station? Yes, your friend injured someone with a beer bottle, and she's been detained now. It was late, and not appropriate to let a young woman take a taxi back alone. I originally planned to send Yvette home first, but Yvette was worried it might be urgent and insisted on accompanying me to the police station. I had no choice but to start the car and drive straight to the police station. When we arrived, I said to Yvette, "Just wait in the car." Yvette nodded. The police led me into the mediation room where I saw Alma. She was still properly dressed and seemed unharmed. The chubby guy sitting across from her, however, had a thick bandage wrapped around his head, slightly stained with blood. As it turned out, Alma Morris, struggling to find a job, had no choice but to apply for a waitress position at a certain bar. On her very first day at work, she was sexually harassed. Alma then smashed a bottle on that person's head, because it was in a blind spot of the surveillance cameras. There was no witness or physical evidence of the fat guy taking advantage of Alma. However, Alma cracking open the guy's head was a bloody fact. I looked at Alma helplessly, not sure whether to say she was unlucky or that she was impulsive. Fortunately, this wasn't considered a major incident. I glanced at the chubby guy with a big head and ears sitting across from us. He was just trying to extort money. In the end, I paid $50,000 to reach a settlement with the other party and left the police station with Alma. "I will definitely pay you back this $50,000. I glanced at her. The last time Alma said this was when she borrowed money to find Darwin Lloyd. Who would have thought that years later, I would still be her creditor? "Let me take you home. Did you drive here?" I pointed to the Porsche and noticed Yvette Johnston getting out of the car. She was leaning against the car door, looking down at her phone. Alma stopped in her tracks. Her tone was harsh. "Who's that woman?" I thought for a moment and said, "My blind date." Alma widened her eyes in disbelief. "Simon Joan, how could you be with another woman?" She stopped mid-sentence, staring at me wide-eyed, unable to continue. I looked at her coldly and was about to turn and walk towards the car. After just 2 steps, Alma suddenly grabbed my arm. She sniffled, sobbing as she said, "Simon, you've changed. You weren't like this before." The me from before? I don't know which before she's referring to. If it's the Simon Joan from my previous life. He's long dead. Died on the way to attend his wife's funeral, who had committed suicide for love. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to look at Alma. No one stays in the same place forever, unless they don't love themselves at all. Alma, whatever you're holding on to, it's time to let go. 5 years later, I brought my pregnant wife, along with my parents, back to my hometown for a visit. The driver took us to the familiar apartment building. I opened the trunk, which was full of gifts my mother had prepared for relatives and friends. The 4 of us, except for the pregnant Yvette Johnston, each carried 2 full hands of gifts, ready to go upstairs. Just as we entered the stairwell, a burst of intense arguing came from the left apartment on the 1st floor. That was the Morris family's home. As outsiders, it wasn't our place to interfere. We intended to pretend we didn't hear anything and just pass by the door. Suddenly, the door opened. A short, thin man, red-faced and fuming, came out of the apartment cursing. Seeing us, he paused and stopped talking. I inadvertently glanced inside the apartment, where Alma was sprawled on the floor in a mess, crying uncontrollably. "Get out!" she shouted. "Get out! How dare you go to prostitutes? Have you no shame? Don't ever come back to this home again." While Alma was still immersed in her immense grief, I carefully supported Yvette's waist, helping her climb the stairs. Back home, my mother let out a sigh. On the way up, she and my father had barely dared to breathe. Mother said that the man was introduced by a colleague of Alma's father. Although he wasn't great in any aspect, His family owned a restaurant and had some money. But who would have thought, a year ago, there was a mass food poisoning incident at the restaurant. Not only did they have to close the business, but they also incurred a huge debt. Alma's parents were pitiful too, retired and at such an old age. To supplement Alma's household income, they were working part-time at the courier station across from the residential complex. As Yvette listened to my mother's story, she actually shed tears. Seeing my surprise, she pointed at her belly and stuck out her tongue. "It's the pregnancy hormones." I smiled faintly, wiped away her tears, and pulled her into my arms. Living this life again. My life hasn't been particularly dramatic or grand, but I think peaceful happiness is more than enough.